A true king, blood of Aegon the Conqueror, who was my brother, my husband, and my love. If any man questions my son's right to the Iron Throne, let him prove his claim with his body. Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen, Fire and Blood, the Sons of the Dragon. The death of King Aenys Targaryen was very sudden and very unexpected given the king's young age. But what was even more so unexpected was as the ashes of Aenys' funeral pyre were still warm, the Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen flown across the narrow sea to Pentos, and when she returned, dark wings had come with her, Balerion the Black Dread, and the exiled Prince Maegor. Many saw the sight of the Black Dread as an ill omen. Maegor descended on Dragonstone, but only long enough to claim the crown, not the ornate golden crown of his brother Aenys, with images of the Seven, but the iron crown of his father, set with blood-red rubies. His mother placed it on his head, and the lords and knights gathered there, knelt as he proclaimed himself Maegor of House Targaryen, first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. Some say there was an uncomfortable silence across Dragonstone, and that the air was thick with suspense, and, for some, fear. But of all the men and women present, both highborn and low, only one man, Grand Maester Garwin, dared object to Maegor's self-proclamation. By all the laws of inheritance, the laws Aegon the Conqueror had affirmed after the conquest, the Iron Throne should now pass to King Aenys' eldest son, Aegon. The Maester boldly said, "The Iron Throne will go to the man who has the strength to seize it." Maegor replied, whereupon, as he finished his sentence, he decreed the immediate execution of the Grand Maester, taking off Garwin's old grey head himself with a single blow of Blackfire. Again, no one publicly objected to this. The now Dowager Queen Alyssa Velaryon and her younger children, Viserys, Jaehaerys, and Alysanne, were not on hand to witness King Maegor's return or self-coronation. She had fled from Dragonstone within hours of her husband's funeral, crossing Blackwater Bay to her Lord Father's castle on the nearby island of Driftmark, the seat of House Velaryon and their powerful navy. When told of their absence, Maegor gave a shrug and gave no comment, then retired to the chamber of the Painted Table with the Maester to dictate letters to lords great and small throughout the realm. At this stage there were few currently aware of Aenys' death, and Maegor wanted to establish himself as king before Prince Aegon, halfway across Westeros, had time to react. In fact, given both Princess Rhaena and Aegon were actively being besieged at Craigcall Castle, there was little they could have done to stop Maegor anyway. 100 ravens flew within the day. The next day, Maegor flew as well, mounting Balerion. He crossed Blackwater Bay to King's Landing, accompanied by the Dowager Queen Visenya upon Vhagar. The return of dragons set off riots in the city, as hundreds tried to flee, only to find the gates closed and barred. The warriors' sons, the Militant's arm of the faith, held the city walls, as well as the construction site of what would become the Red Keep, and of course, the Hill of Rhaenys, where they had made the Set of Remembrance their own fortress. The Targaryens raised their standard atop Visenya's hill, and called for all little men to gather to them. Thousands did. Visenya Targaryen proclaimed that her son Maegor had come to be their king, a true king, blood of Aegon the Conqueror, who was my brother, my husband, and my love. If any man should question my son's right to the Iron Throne, let him prove his claim with his body, the Dowager Queen decreed. The warriors' sons, the most faithful of the faithful, were not slow to accept her challenge. Down from the Hill of Rhaenys they rode, 700 knights in silvered steel, led by their grand captain, Sir Daemon Morrigan, called Daemon the Devout. "Let us not bandy words," Maegor told him. "Swords will decide this matter." Sir Daemon agreed. The gods will grant victory to the man whose cause was just, he said. Let each side have 7 champions, as it was done in Andalos of old. Can you find 6 men to stand beside you? As Aenys had taken the Kingsguard to Dragonstone, and Maegor stood alone, the king turned to the crowd. "Who will come and stand by their king?" he called. Many turned away in fear or pretended they did not hear. for the prowess of the warrior's sons was known to all, as well as the fact that Prince Aegon was his father's true heir and not Maegor. But after a short silence that seemed to drag on forever, at last one man offered himself, not a knight, but a simple, common-born man-at-arms, called himself Dick Bean. We cannot even be sure if this was his true name, given how records of history often forget the deeds and lives of the small folk. "I've been a king's man since I was a boy," he said. "I mean to die a king's man." It was only then the first knight stepped forward. "This man shames us all," he shouted. "Are there no true knights here? No leal men?" The knight was Benar Brune, the squire who had slain Harren the Red and had been knighted by King Aenys himself. His support of Maegor, the brother of the king who had knighted him, roused many in the crowd, and his scorn drove others to offer their swords as well. The names of Maegor's champions are writ large in the histories of Westeros. Sir Bram of Blackhall, a hedge knight; Sir Rayford Rosby; Sir Guy Lothston, who was more commonly known as Guy the Glutton; and Sir Lucifer Massey, the Lord of Stonedance. I do not understand. What is a trial of 7? It was another form of trial by combat. Ancient, seldom invoked. It came across the narrow sea with the Andals and their 7 gods. In any trial by combat, the accuser and the accused are asking the gods to decide the issue between them. The Andals believed that if 7 champions fought on each side, the gods, being thus honoured, would be more likely to take a hand and see that a just result was achieved. Or maybe perhaps they simply had a taste for swordplay. Sir Duncan the Tall, Baelor Targaryen, and Leo Tyrell on trials of 7, a knight of the 7 kingdoms, the Hedge Knight. Like Maegor's champions, the 7 warriors' sons have likewise been dutifully recorded in the annals of history to live forever by their deeds. They were Sir Daemon Morrigan, called Daemon the Devout, Grand Captain of the warriors' sons; Sir Lyle Bracken; Sir Harris Hawpe, called Death Said Harry; Sir Egon Ambrose; Sir Dickon Flowers, the Bastard of Beesbury; Sir William the Wanderer; and Sir Garibaldi of the 7 Stars, the Sceptred Knight. It is written that Daemon the Devout led a prayer beseeching the warrior to grant strength to their arms. Afterwards, the Dowager Queen Visenya gave the command to begin, and the trial of 7 began. The common man, known only as Dick Bean, was the first of the 14 men to die, cut down by Lyle Bracken mere seconds after combat began. From there on, accounts differ markedly about what happened next. One witness says that when the hugely fat Sir Guy the Glutton was cut open, the remains of 40 half-digested pies spilled out. While we know that Sir Guy was in fact killed, the ideas of the pies falling out from his gut is clearly a tall tale. Another claims that Sir Garibaldi of the 7 Stars sang a prayer song as he fought, which does seem more believable. Several accounts tell us that Lord Massey hacked off one of the arms of Harry Hawpe. In one account, Harry tossed his battle axe into his remaining hand and buried it between Lord Massey's eyes. Other chroniclers suggest he simply died. Some say the fight went on for hours, others that most of the combatants were down and dying in mere moments, that there was an abrupt chaos, then stillness. All agreed that great deeds were done and mighty blows exchanged, until the end found Maegor Targaryen standing alone against Daemon the Devout and Willem the Wanderer. Both the warriors' sons were badly wounded, and Maegor had Blackfire, the Valyrian steel blade of his father, in his hand. But even so, it was said to be a very near thing. Even as he fell, Sir Willem dealt the king a terrible blow to the back of the head, cracking his helm that left him incensed. Many thought Maegor dead. The blow should have been fatal, at least to a normal man. That's until his mother removed his helm. "The king breathes," she said. "The king lives." The victory was his. 7 of the mightiest of the warriors' sons were dead, including their commander, but more than 700 remained, armed and armoured and gathered about the crown of the hill. Dowager Queen Visenya commanded her son be taken to the maesters. As the litter bearers bore down the hill, the swords of the faith dropped to their knees in submission. The Dowager Queen ordered them to return to the fortified sept atop the hill of Rhaenys. For 27 long days, Maegor Targaryen lingered at the point of death, whilst maesters treated him with potions and septons prayed above his bed. Meanwhile, in the sept of remembrance, the warriors' sons prayed as well, and argued about their course. Some felt they had no other choice but to accept Maegor as king, since the gods had blessed him with victory. Others insisted they were bound by oath to obey the High Septon and fight on. The Kingsguard arrived from Dragonstone in the meantime, at the behest of the Dowager Queen. They took command of 1,000 of the Targaryen loyalists in the city and surrounded the Hill of Rhaenys. On Driftmark, the widowed Dowager Queen Alyssa Velaryon, when she found out about Maegor, proclaimed her own son, Aegon, as the true king, but few heeded her call. The young prince was just shy of manhood, remained at Craighall, half the realm away, trapped in a castle surrounded by poor fellows and pious peasants, most of whom considered him an abomination. In the citadel of Oldtown, the Archmaesters met in a conclave to debate the succession and to choose a new Grand Maester. Thousands of poor fellows streamed towards King's Landing, but those from the west followed the Hedge Knight, Sir Horace Hill. Those from the south, a gigantic axeman called Wat the Hewer. When the ragged band encamped around Craighall left to join their fellows on the march, Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaena were finally able to depart. Abandoning their royal progress, they made their way to the seat of House Lannister, Casterly Rock, where Lyman Lannister offered them his protection. It was in those first days at Casterly Rock that Lady Jocasta first discerned that Princess Rhaena was with child. Lord Lyman's maesters tell us. On the 28th day after the trial of 7, a ship arrived from Pentos upon the evening tide, carrying 2 women and 600 sellswords. Alys Harroway, Maegor's second wife, had returned to Westeros, but not alone. With her sailed another woman, a curious woman, a raven-haired beauty, known only as Tyenna of the Tower. Some said the woman was Maegor's concubine. Others named her Lady Alys's paramour. The natural daughter of a Pentosi magister, Tyenna was a tavern dancer who had raised to be a courtesan. She was rumoured to be a poisoner and a sorceress as well. Many queer tales were told about her, yet as soon as she arrived, Dowager Queen Visenya dismissed her son's maesters and septons and gave Maegor over to Tyenna's care. The next morning, the king awoke, rising with the sun, when Maegor appeared on the walls of the rising Red Keep, standing between Alys Harroway and Tyenna of Pentos. The crowd cheered wildly, and the city erupted in celebration, but the revels soon died away when Maegor mounted Balerion and descended upon the Hill of Rhaenys, where several hundred of the warriors' sons were at their morning prayers in the fortified sept. As dragonfire set the building aflame, archers and spearmen waited outside for those who came bursting through the doors. It was said the screams of the burning men could be heard throughout the city, and that smoke lingered over King's Landing for weeks to come. Thus, the very best of the warriors' sons meet a horrifying, fiery end. Though other chapters of them remained in Oldtown and Lannisport, Goldtown and Stony Sept, the Order would never again approach its former strength. But with this sheer act of brutality, Maegor had made a very clear statement about the price of opposing him. King Maegor's wars against the Faith Militant had only just begun, however. It would continue for the remainder of his reign. The king's first act upon ascending the Iron Throne was to command the poor fellows, swarming towards the city, lay down their weapons under the penalty of death. When his decree had no effect, His Grace commanded all Leal lords to take up the field and dispersed the faith's ragged horde by force. In response, the High Septon of Oldtown called upon true and pious children of the gods to take up arms in defence of the faith and put an end to the reign of dragons and monsters and abominations. The swords and stars troubled even the Targaryens. Jenna Lannister to Jaime Lannister, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 33, Jaime 5. King Maegor Targaryen's rise as king was quick and effective, and before anyone could truly oppose him, he had been crowned, retaken control of King's Landing, and dealt the Faith Uprising a huge blow. The burning of the Scepter Remembrance, as well as his victory in his trial of 7, had sent a message across the realm that Maegor Targaryen was not his brother Aenys, but a king forged with much stronger steel. In truth, defeating the Faith Militant within King's Landing was impressive, but Maegor's war against the Faith had just begun, as pockets of unrest remained up and down the Seven Kingdoms. It would continue for the remainder of his reign in one form or another. The king's first true act after ascending the Iron Throne was to command the poor fellows swarming towards the city to lay down their weapons under penalty of death. Many at court indeed took him for his word, but his decree had no effect. Maegor commanded all Leal lords take to the field and disperse the faith's ragged horde by force. In response, the High Septon in Old Town called upon true and pious children of the gods to take up arms in defence of the faith and put an end to the reign of dragons, monsters, and abominations. The first battle would take place in the Reach, at the small town of Stonebridge on the banks of the River Manda. There were 9,000 poor fellows under the command of a man known as Wat the Hewer. They had found themselves caught between 6 small hosts loyal to Maegor as they attempted to cross the Manda at Stonebridge, with half of his men on the northern bank of the river and half on the south. Wat's army was unable to mount a proper coordinated defence, and thus was cut to pieces. We must also at this time recall that most of the poor fellows were common men, untrained, undisciplined, clad in boiled leather, rough spun, and scraps of rusted steel, and armed largely with woodmen's axes, sharpened sticks, and the lucky few with farming implements. It is not a surprise they had little battle coordination and proved utterly unable to stand against the charge of armoured knights on heavy horses. So grievous was the slaughter that the Manda ran red with blood for 20 leagues for days after. From then on, the town that had been Stonebridge and its nearby castle came to be known as Bitterbridge, and in the coming centuries, Bitterbridge would certainly prove itself worthy of that name. Wat the Hewer himself was taken alive, though not before slaying half a dozen knights, amongst them Lord Meadows of Grassy Vale, the commander of the king's largest host. The giant was delivered to King's Landing in chains. What did she care what Maegor the Cruel had decreed 300 years ago? Instead of taking the swords out of the hands of the faithful, he should have used them for his own ends. The Thoughts of Cersei Lannister, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 28, Cersei 6. By the time Wat the Hewer had been delivered to King's Landing, a second band of poor fellows led by the pious knight Sir Horace Hill had reached the banks of the Green Fork of the Blackwater with an even larger host. Close to 13,000 poor fellows, if some chroniclers can be believed. This host was different, however. Their ranks stiffened by the addition of 200 well-trained and armed mounted warrior sons from Stony Sept, and the household knights and feudal levies of a dozen rebel lords from the Westerlands and Riverlands. Joining them was Lord Rupert Folwell, famed as the fighting fool who led the ranks of the pious who had answered the High Septon's call. With him rode Sir Lionel Lorch, Sir Alan Terrick, Lord Christopher Wayne, Lord John Leicester, and many other purist knights. Together, the army of the faithful amounted to 20,000 men, no small number and no easy task for a conventional army to deal with. King Maegor's army was of like size. However, the king had almost twice as many armoured horsemen, as well as a large contingent of longbowmen. But most important of all, the king himself was riding Balerion the Blackdread. Even so, the battle proved a savage struggle. The fighting fool slew 2 knights of the Kingsguard before he himself was cut down by the Lord of Maidenpool. Big John Hogg, fighting for the king, was blinded by a sword slash early in the battle, yet managed to rally his men and lead a charge that broke through the lines of the faithful and put the poor fellows to flight. A rainstorm dampened Balerion the Blackdread's dark fires, but could not quench them entirely, and amidst smoke and screams, King Maegor descended again and again to serve his foes with flames. By nightfall, victory was Maegor's, and the remaining poor fellows threw down their axes and steamed away in all directions. The triumphant Maegor returned to King's Landing to seat himself once more upon the Iron Throne in the rising Red Keep. This time, even fewer than before protested his claim to the crown. When Wat the Hewer was delivered to him, chained yet still defiant, Maegor took off his limbs with the giant's own axe, but commanded his maesters to keep the man alive, so he might attend my wedding. Then his grace announced his intent to take the rumoured sorceress, Tyanna of Pentos, as his third wife. There are some accounts that claim there were whispers that his mother, the Dowager Queen Visenya, had no love for the Pentosi sorceress, despite the fact some versions of the Trial of Seven have her saving Maegor's life in the aftermath. Only one man was defiant, Grand Maester Myros, who dared to speak openly. A very foolish decision given the fate of his predecessor. "Your one true wife awaits you in the Hightower," Maegor said. The king heard him out in silence, then descended from the throne, drew Blackfire, and slew the Grand Maester where he stood. The old High Septon told my father the king's laws are one thing, and the laws of gods another. Aegon Targaryen to Duncan the Tall, a knight of the Seven Kingdoms, the sworn sword. Maegor Targaryen and Tyanna Apentos were wed atop the Hill of Rhaenys amidst the ashes and bones of the warriors' sons who had died there. It is said that Maegor had put 12 Septons to death before he found one willing to perform the ceremony. Wat the Hewer, limbless, was kept alive to witness the marriage. King Aenys' widow, Queen Alyssa, was present as well, with her younger children, Viserys, Jaehaerys, and Alysanne. There were some who claim that it was a visit from Dowager Queen Visenya and Vhagar that had persuaded her to leave her sanctuary on Driftmark and return to court, where Alyssa and her brothers and cousins of House Velaryon paid homage to Maegor as the true king. The widowed queen was even compelled to join the other ladies of the court in disrobing Maegor and escorting him to his bedchamber to consummate his marriage, a bedding ceremony presided over by the king's second wife, Alys Harroway. That task done, Alyssa and the other ladies took their leave of the royal bedchamber, but Alys remained, joining the king and his newest wife. Many would take Queen Alyssa's attendance and homage to Maegor as her recognising Maegor's claim to the throne, which only weakened her own son Prince Aegon's claim to it. Regardless of how much of this was done willingly by Alyssa, and how much was at the encouragement of the Dowager Queen and her dragon, doesn't really matter. The fact his own mother had seemingly supported Maegor's claim to the crown made Prince Aegon's position look even weaker than it already was. Regardless of Queen Alyssa's true feelings on the matter, across the realm in Oldtown, the High Septon was loud in his denunciations of the abomination and his whores, whilst the king's first wife, Cerys of House Hightower, continued to insist she was Maegor's only lawful queen. In the Westlands, Aegon Targaryen, the Prince of Dragonstone, and technically his father King Aenys' heir, and his wife, Princess Rhaena, remained defiant as well. But the reality was there was little they could really do. All throughout the turmoil of Maegor's ascension, King Aenys' son and the princess, his wife, had remained at Casterly Rock, where Rhaena had grown great with child. Most of the knights and young lords who had set out with them on their ill-fated royal progress had now abandoned them, rushing off to King's Landing to bend the knee to Maegor. Even Rhaena's handmaidens and companions had found excuses to absent themselves, save for two, her friend Elaine Royce and former favourite Melanie Piper, who arrived at Lannisport with her brothers to swear loyalty to Aegon. All of his life, Prince Aegon had been considered the heir presumptive to the Iron Throne, but now, suddenly, he found himself reviled by the pious and abandoned by many of those he had thought his friends. Maegor's supporters, who seemed more numerous every day, were not shy in saying that Aegon was his father's son, suggesting that they saw in him the same weakness that had brought down King Aenys. Aegon had never ridden a dragon, they pointed out, whereas Maegor had claimed the king of dragons, Balerion, and the prince's own wife, Princess Rhaena, had been flying on Dreamfire since the age of 12. Alyssa's attendance at Maegor's wedding was also a contributing factor, with many claiming that Aegon's own mother had now abandoned his cause. Though Lord Lyman Lannister stood firm when Maegor demanded Aegon and his sister be returned to King's Landing, in chains if need be, even he would not go as far as to pledge his sword to the young prince, who now found himself being called the Pretender and Aegon The Uncrowned, and thus it was there at Casterly Rock that Princess Rhaena gave birth to Aegon's daughters, twin girls they named Arya and Rhaella. From the Starry Sept came another blistering proclamation from the High Septon that these children were two abominations, the fruits of lust and incest, and accursed of the gods. The maester at Casterly Rock who helped deliver the children tells us that afterwards Princess Rhaena begged the prince to take them across the narrow sea to Tyrosh or Mere of Volantis, anywhere beyond Maegor's reach. For I would gladly give up my own life to make you king, but I will not put our girls at risk. But her words fell on a stony silence, and her tears were shed in vain, for Prince Aegon, Aegon the Uncrowned, was determined to claim his birthright. The High Septon speaks for the seven here on Earth. Strike at him, and you are striking at the gods themselves. Kevin Lannister to Cersei Lannister, A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 54, Cersei 1. By the start of the year 43 AC, King Maegor now had the realm under his control. While the Faith Militant would still pester his remaining reign, they wouldn't be the level of threat they were before. In King's Landing, Maegor had taken personal charge of the construction of the Red Keep, and very much wanted to shape it into his own vision. Much of the finished work was now undone or changed. New builders and workmen were brought in, and secret passages and tunnels crept through the depths of Aegon's high hill. Arguably, Maegor's biggest change to the plans was to add a whole new structure. So as the red stone towers rose, the king commanded the building of a castle within the castle, a fortified keep surrounded by a dry moat that would soon become known as Maegor's Holdfast. Maegor then made Lord Lucas Harroway, the father of his second wife, Queen Alys Harroway, his new hand of the king. But Lucas had no real influence over Maegor, and his title as Hand was just that in name. The reality is, it was not the Hand who had the king's ear. His grace might rule the Seven Kingdoms, men whispered, but he himself was ruled by three queens. His mother, Dowager Queen Visenya, the wife and sister of Aegon the Conqueror, Queen Alys Harroway, and the Pentoshi so-called witch, Queen Tiana, the mistress of whisperers, and the king's raven for her black hair. She spoke with the rats and the spiders, it was said, and all the vermin at King's Landing came to her by night to tell tales of any fool rash enough to speak against the king. Filthy, unshaven creatures, armed with spears and axes, and clad in bits of dented plate, rusted mail, and cracked leather, under rough spun surcoats, bleached white and blazoned with seven-pointed stars of the faith, the High Sparrow's ragged army. Cersei Lannister's thoughts on the reborn poor fellows. A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 65, Cersei 2. While the threat of the Faith Militant had been reduced, thousands of poor fellows still haunted the roads and wild places of the Reach, the Trident, and the Vale. Though they would never again assemble in large numbers to face the king in open battle, the stars fought on in smaller ways, falling upon travellers and swarming over towns and villages or poorly defended castles, slaying the king's loyalists wherever they found them. So Horace Hill, who had escaped the Battle of the Great Fork, but defeat and flight had tarnished him, and his followers were few. The new leader of the poor fellows were men like Ragged Silas, Septon Moon, and Dennis the Lame, hardly distinguishable from outlaws. One of their most vicious captains was a woman called Poxy Jane Poor, whose savage followers made the woods between King's Landing and Storm's End all but impassable to honest travellers. The more respectable order of the Warrior's Sons had chosen a new Grand Captain in the form of Sir Joffrey Doggett, the Red Dog of the Hills, who was determined to restore the order to its former glory. When Sir Joffrey set out from Lannisport to seek the blessing of the High Septon, 100 men rode with him. By the time he arrived in Old Town, so many knights and squires and free riders had joined him that his number had swollen to at least 2,000. Elsewhere in the realm, other restless lords and men of faith were gathering men as well, and plotting ways to bring the dragon down. None of this had gone unnoticed. Ravens flew to every corner of the realm, summoning lords and landed knights of doubtful loyalty to King's Landing to bend the knee to Maegor, swear homage and deliver a son or daughter as a hostage for their obedience. The stars and swords were outlawed. Membership in either order was henceforth punishable by death. The High Septon was commanded to deliver himself to the Red Keep to stand trial for high treason. The High Septon responded from the Starry Sept, commanding the king to present himself in Old Town to beg the forgiveness of the gods for his sins and cruelties. Many of the faithful echoed his defiance. Some pious lords did travel to King's Landing to pay homage and present hostages, but more did not, trusting to their numbers and the strength of their castles to keep them safe. While mostly unconcerned about the situation with the faith, King Maegor let the poison fester for almost half a year. So engrossed was he with the building of his Red Keep. It was his ever-vigilant mother who struck first. The Dowager Queen mounted Vhagar and brought fire and blood to the Riverlands, as she had once done to Dorne so many years ago during the Dragon's Wrath. In a single night, the seats of House Blaintree, House Terrick, House Deddings, House Leicester, and House Wayne were set aflame, and countless were left dead. This seemed to somewhat spur Maegor, as he himself took wing, flying Balerion to the Westerlands, where he burned the castles of the Brooms, the Farwells, the Lorches, and the other pious lords who had defied his summons to King's Landing to bend the knee. Lastly, he descended upon the seat of House Doggett, reducing it to naught but ash. The fires claimed the lives of Sir Joffrey Doggett, the leader of the warriors' sons, father, mother, and younger sister, along with all the sworn swords and serving men. As pillars of smoke rose all through the Westerlands and the Riverlands, Vhagar and Balerion turned south. During Aegon's conquest, another now dead Lord Hightower, counselled by another now dead High Septon, had opened the gates of Old Town when faced with the prospect of dragons. But now it seemed as if the greatest and most populous city in Westeros must surely burn. As news of Maegor and Visenya's intentions spread, thousands fled Old Town that very night, streaming from the city gates or taking ship for distant ports if they had the coin to do so. Those who could not leave, many thousands, took to the streets in drunken revelry. Records kept in the citadel of Old Town about the event have immortalised the words and intentions of the small folk. "This is a night for song and sin and drink," one man told another, "for come tomorrow, the virtuous and the vile burn together." Others gathered in the septs and the temples and ancient woods to pray they might be spared. In the starry sept, the High Septon railed and thundered, calling down the wrath of the gods upon House Targaryen. The archmacers of the citadel met in a secret conclave. The men at the city watch filled sacks with sand and pails with water to fight the fires they knew were coming on daybreak. Along the city walls, crossbows, scorpions, spitfires, and spear throwers were hoisted onto the battlements in the vain hope of bringing down a dragon when they appeared. Led by Sir Morgan Hightower, a younger brother of the Lord of Old Town, 200 warriors' sons spilled forth from their chapter house to defend his high holiness, surrounding the starry sept with a ring of steel, and, atop the high tower, the great beacon fire turned a baleful green, the sign of war. As Lord Martin Hightower called his banners, Old Town waited for the dawn and the coming of the dragons. The Hightowers are an ancient family, very rich and very proud. Draw a moment to Daenerys Targaryen, A Clash of Kings Chapter 12. Daenerys 1. The dragons did come to Old Town, Vhagar first, as the sun was rising, then Balerion just before midday, but they found the gates of the city open, the battlements unmanned, and the banners of House Targaryen, Tyrell, and Hightower flying side by side atop the city walls. The Dowager Queen Visenya was the first to learn the news. Sometime during the blackest hour of that long and dreadful night, the High Septon had suddenly died. A man of 53, as tireless as he was fearless, and to all appearances in robust good health. This High Septon had been renowned for his strength. More than once he had preached for a day and a night without taking sleep or nourishment. His sudden death shocked the city and dismayed his followers. The causes of his death are debated to this very day. Some say that his High Holiness took his own life in what was either an act of a craven afraid to face the wrath of King Maegor, or a noble sacrifice to spare the good folk of Old Town from dragonfire. Others claim the Seven struck him down for the sin of pride, for heresy, treason and arrogance. Many and more remain certain he was murdered. But by whom? Sir Morgan Hightower did the deed at the command of his brother, some say, and Sir Morgan was seen entering and leaving the High Septon's privy chamber that night. Others point to Lady Patrice Hightower, Lord Martin's maiden aunt, and reputed witch, who did indeed seek an audience with his High Holiness at dusk, though he was alive when she departed. The Archmaesters of the Citadel are also suspected, though whether they made use of dark arts, an assassin, or a poisoned scroll is still a matter of debate. Messages went back and forth between the Citadel and Starry Sept all night, and there are still others who hold them all blameless, and lay the High Septon's death at the door of another rumoured sorceress and witch, the Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen. The truth will likely never be known, but the swift reaction of Lord Martin Hightower when word reached him is beyond dispute. At once he dispatched his own knights to disarm and arrest the warrior's sons, amongst them his own brother. The city gates were opened, and Targaryen banners raised along the walls. Even before Vhagar's wings were sighted, Lord Hightower's men were rousting the most devout from their beds and marching them to the Starry Sept to choose a new High Septon. It required a single ballot. Almost as one, the wise men and women of the faith turned to a Septim Pater, 90 years old, blind, stooped and feeble, but famously amiable. The new High Septon almost collapsed beneath the weight of the crystal crown when it was placed upon his head. But when Maegor Targaryen appeared before him in the Starry Sept, he was only too pleased to bless him as king and anoint his head with holy oils, even if he did forget the words of the blessing. Queen Visenya soon returned to Dragonstone with Vhagar, but King Maegor remained in Oldtown for almost half the year, holding court and presiding over trials. The captive warriors' sons, a choice was given. Those who renounced their allegiance to the Order would be permitted to travel to the Wall and live out their days as brothers of the Night's Watch. Those who refused could die as martyrs to their faith. 3/4 of the captives chose to take the black. The remainder died. 7 of their number, famous knights and the sons of lords, were given the honour of having King Maegor himself remove their heads with black fire. The rest of the condemned were beheaded by their own former brothers in arms. Of all their number, only one man received a full royal pardon, Sir Morgan Hightower, the brother of Lord Martin Hightower. Some see this as evidence of Sir Morgan's role in the death of the old High Septon. The new High Septon formally dissolved both the warrior sons and the poor fellows, commanding their remaining members to lay down their arms in the name of the gods. The 7 had no more need of warriors, proclaimed the High Holiness. Henceforth, the Iron Throne would protect and defend the faith. King Maegor granted the surviving members of the faith Militant till the year's end to surrender their weapons and give up their rebellious ways. After that, those who remained defiant would find bounties on their head: a gold dragon for the head of any unrepentant warrior's son, a silver stag for the lice-ridden scalp of a poor fellow. During his time at Oldtown, the king would also reconcile with his first wife, Queen Cerys Hightower, the sister of his host, Lord Martin Hightower. Lord Hightower agreed to accept the king's other wives, to treat them with respect and honour and speak no further ill against them, whilst Maegor swore to restore Cerys to all rights, incomes and privileges due to her as his wedded wife and queen. A great feast was held at the Hightower to celebrate the reconciliation. The revels even included a bedding and second consummation, so all men would know this to be true and loving union. After dealing with the High Septon once and for all, King Maegor lingered at Oldtown for seemingly the first half of 43 AC. That was until another challenger to his throne arose. Maegor's long absence from King's Landing, as he put an end to the Faith Uprising, had not gone unnoticed by his nephew, whom, being the late King Aenys' eldest son, should have been the king. But in Maegor's absence, Prince Aegon was quick to seize his chance. Emerging at last from Casterly Rock, the boy whom had been called Aegon The Uncrowned, and his wife Rhaena raced across the Riverlands with a handful of trusted companions and entered King's Landing, sealed beneath sacks of corn. If the guards at the gates had checked the cargo more thoroughly, Aegon's rebellion surely would have ended there and then. But Aegon the Uncrowned had an issue. With so few followers, he dared not seat himself upon the Iron Throne, as he knew he could not hold it. Most in the realm had now sworn themselves to Maegor, most out of fear, and fear is a hard thing to break from. It was not the throne itself they had come for. They were in fact there for Rhaena's dragon, Dreamfire, and so that the prince might finally claim a dragon of his own, his father's beloved Quicksilver. In this bold endeavour, they were aided by friends in Maegor's own court, who had grown weary at the king's cruelties. Whom these people were, we cannot say, but they risked a lot to help Aegon's cause. The prince and princess entered King's Landing in a wagon pulled by mules, but when they made their departure, it was now on Dragonback, flying side by side. From there, Aegon and Rhaena returned to the Westerlands, where most of his few allies were from, to assemble an army. The Lannisters of Casterly Rock were still reluctant to openly support Aegon's cause, given the sheer scale of the mountain he had to climb to win the throne. So instead, Aegon rallied his army at Pink Maiden Castle, the seat of House Piper. John Piper, the Lord of Pink Maiden, had pledged his sword to the prince, but it was widely believed it was his fiery sister, Melanie, Rhaenyra's girlhood friend, who had won him to the cause. It was there at Pink Maiden that Aegon Targaryen, mounted on Quicksilver, descended from the skies to denounce his uncle as a tyrant and a usurper, and call upon all honest men to rally to his banner. I do not have time for tears. Rhaenyra, after hearing of the death of her husband Aegon in the battle beneath the God's Eye, Fire and Blood, the sons of the dragon. The lords and knights who answered Aegon the Uncrowned's call were largely Westermen and river lords. To his side came the lords Tarbeck, Root, Vance, Charlton, Bray, Page, Perrin, Barman and Westerling. Lord Corbray the Vale, the bastard of Barrington in the north, and the fourth son of the Lord of Griffin's Roost in the Stormlands also answered Aegon's call. From Lannisport came 500 men under the banner of a bastard son of Lord Lyman Lannister, Sir Tyler Hill, by which ploy the cunning Lord of Casterly Rock indeed lent his support to the young prince, while still keeping his own hands clean should Maegor prevail. He had given himself plausible deniability. Interestingly, the Piper levies were not led by Lord John or his brothers, but by their sister Melanie, who donned a man's mail and took up a spear. 15,000 men had joined the rebellion as Aegon the Uncrowned began his march across the Riverlands to stake his claim to his father's throne, led by the prince himself on King Aenys' beloved dragon Quicksilver. While given this number was likely more than Aegon could have hoped for, it would still be a hard fight against Maegor. Though their ranks included seasoned commanders and knights, not a single great lord openly had rallied to Prince Aegon's cause, most unwilling to risk so much for the unproven Aegon. But Queen Tyenna, the mistress of whisperers, wrote to warn Maegor that Storm's End, the Eyrie, Winterfell and Casterly Rock had all been in secret communication with Aegon, with his brother's widowed queen Alyssa. Before declaring for the Prince of Dragonstone, they wished to be convinced he might prevail. Prince Aegon required a small token victory to do this. There is much debate to how true this claim by Tyenna was. There was very little indication any of the great houses were willing to involve themselves in this conflict, save perhaps Lyman Lannister. Some speculate Tyenna might have falsified these claims to spur Maegor's eagerness, ensuring he took the threat seriously. No matter the truth, Maegor denied Aegon a chance to prove himself, as the king called his own banners. From Harrenhal came forth Lord Harroway, from Riverrun, Lord Tully. Sir Davos Darkland of the Kingsguard marshalled 5,000 swords in King's Landing, and struck out west immediately to meet the rebels. Up from the Reach came Lord Peake, Merryweather and Caswell, and their levies. Prince Aegon's slow-moving host found armies closing from all sides, each smaller than their own force, but so many that the young prince, still but 17 years of age, did not know which way to turn. He became overwhelmed, and thus chose inaction. Lord Corbray advised him to engage each foe separately before they could join their power as one, but Aegon was loath to divide his strength. Instead he chose to march on towards King's Landing. My brother Aegon died at the hands of our uncle in the battle beneath the God's Eye. His wife, my sister Rhaenyra, was not with him at that battle, but she died that day as well. King Jaehaerys I on the battle beneath the God's Eye. Fire and Blood, Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Just south of the God's Eye, Aegon encountered Davos Darkland blocking his path, sitting on the high ground behind a wall of spears. Even as scouts reported Lord Merryweather and Caswell advancing from the south, and Lord Tully and Harroway from the north, Prince Aegon commanded a charge, hoping to break through the Kingslanders before the other loyalists fell upon his flanks. He mounted Quicksilver to lead the attack himself, but scarcely had he taken wing when he heard shouts and saw his men below pointing to where Balerion the Black Dread had appeared in the southern sky. King Maegor had come. This would not be Aegon's chance to prove himself. No matter the outcome of this battle, the war would be decided there and then between Aegon and Maegor. To the victor would go the Iron Throne. But this event was much more significant than most at the time would ever understand, as, for the first time since the doom of Valyria so many centuries ago, dragon fought dragon in the sky. Aegon's dragon, his father's beloved Quicksilver, was a quarter of the size of Balerion. Quicksilver, in truth, was no match for the older, fiercer Balerion, and her pale white fireballs were engulfed and washed away in great gouts of black flame. Then, the Black Dread fell upon from above, his jaws closing around her neck as he ripped one wing from her body. Screaming and smoking, the young dragon plunged to the earth, and Prince Aegon with her. The first dragon battle in hundreds of years was over in a mere instant. The battle below was just as brief, if bloodier. Once Aegon fell, the rebels saw their cause was doomed, and ran, discarding arms and armour as they fled. But the Loyalist army were all around them, and there was no escape. By day's end, 2,000 of Aegon's men had died, versus 100 lost by the king. Amongst Aegon's dead was Lord Alyn Tarback, Denys Snow the Bastard of Barrington, Lord Ronald Vance, Sir Willem Willister, Melanie Piper and her 3 brothers, and of course, the Prince of Dragonstone, the eldest son of King Aenys Targaryen, Aegon The Uncrowned, as he will forever be known to the pages of history. The only notable loss amongst the Loyalists was Sir Davos Darkland of the Kingsguard, slain at the hands of Lord Corbray with the famed Valyrian steel sword Lady Forlorn. Half a year of trials and executions followed. Queen Visenya persuaded her son to spare some of the rebellious lords, but even those who kept their lives lost lands and titles, and were forced to give up hostages to the king. One notable name could be found neither amongst the dead nor the captives. Rhaena Targaryen, sister and wife to Prince Aegon, had not joined the host. Whether that be by his command or at her own choice is still debated to this day. It is well known, however, that she had begged Aegon to forego his claim to the throne and run away to Essos with their babe twin daughters. All that is known for certain is that Rhaena remained at Pink Maiden Castle with her daughters when Aegon marched, and with her dragon Dreamfire. Would the addition of a second dragon to the prince's host have made that much of a difference when battle was joined? It may have been possible. While Balerion was distracted with one dragon, the second could have in turn made an attack on Maegor. Given the size and power of the Black Dread, victory would have still been a faint glimmer for Aegon regardless. The truth is, Rhaena always had the right of it, and Aegon's cause was always doomed to end this way, which is perhaps why she refused to march with him. Others argue if this were the case, why would she have risked her life sneaking into King's Landing to steal Dreamfire and Quicksilver in the first place? We shall never know. When word of the battle reached the west, and Princess Rhaena learned that both her husband and her friend Lady Melanie had fallen, it was said she heard the news in a stony silence. "Will you not weep?" she was asked, to which she replied, "I do not have time for tears." Whereupon, fearing her uncle's wrath, she gathered her twins, Arya and Rhaella, and fled further, first to Lannisport, then across the sea to Fair Isle, where the new lord, Mark Farman, whose father and elder brother had both perished in the battle, fighting for Aegon, gave her sanctuary and swore no harm would come to her beneath his roof. For the better part of a year, the people of Fair Isle watched the east in dread, fearing the sight of Balerion's dark wings. But Maegor never came. Instead, the victorious king returned to the Red Keep, where he grimly set out on his new task, getting himself an heir. What did she care what Maegor the Cruel had decreed 300 years ago? Instead of taking the swords out of the hands of the faithful, he should have used them for his own ends. The Thoughts of Cersei Lannister, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 28, Cersei 6. The year 44 AC, considering the trials Westeros had faced over the last few years, was a peaceful one, compared to what had come before. But despite this supposed peace, the maesters who wrote down this very history of those times all agree the smell of blood and fire still hung heavy in the air. There was a sense of unease across the realm that never truly abated. Maegor Targaryen sat the Iron Throne, now uncontested after the death of Aegon the Uncrowned, and the faith now placated. As his red keep rose around him, some did begin to relax, but for most his court was a grim and cheerless place, despite the presence of his 3 queens. Some argue it was perhaps because of them. Each night he summoned one of his wives to his bed, yet despite bedding 3 young and healthy women, he remained childless, with no heirs but for the sons and daughters of his brother Aenys. While Maegor did usurp the throne from Aegon the Uncrowned, he legitimately took it via the right of conquest after the Battle of the God's Eye. If we follow that line of thought, this would make his brother's next eldest son his legal heir, in this case, the captive Prince Viserys. It was now vital for the stability of Maegor's rule. He had his own child, better yet a son, and soon. People had also begun to call him Maegor the Cruel, and others Kinslayer as well, though it was death to say either of these things in his hearing. In Oldtown, the ancient High Septon put in place by Maegor died, and another was raised up in his place. Though he spoke no word against the king or his 3 queens, the enmity between Maegor and the faith still endured under the surface. While this new High Septon was no longer Maegor's puppet, he would not directly move against the king. After the outlawing, hundreds of poor fellows had been hunted down and slain, their scalps delivered to King's Landing for the bounty, but thousands more still roamed the woods and hedges and the wild places of the 7 kingdoms, cursing the Targaryens with their every breath. One more extreme band even crowned their own High Septon, in the form of a bearded brute named Septon Moon. And a few warriors' sons still endured, led by their grand captain, Sir Joffrey Doggett, the Red Dog of the Hills, his fire to fight raging on harder than ever before after Maegor had burned most of his kin in retaliation. Outlawed and condemned, the Order no longer had the strength to meet the king's men in open battle, so the Red Dog sent them out in the guise of hedge knights to hunt down and slay Targaryen loyalists, the traitors to the faith. The first victim was Sir Morgan Hightower, a former member of the Order who turned Cloak in Oldtown, cut down and butchered on the road to Honeyholt. The aged Lord Merryweather was next to die, followed by Lord Peake's son and heir, Davos Darkland's aged father, even blind John Hogg, all men who had fought for the king at the God's Eye. Though the bounty of the head of a warrior's son was a golden dragon, the small folk and peasants of the realm hid and protected most of them, remembering what they had once been. On Dragonstone, the Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen had finally started to show some true signs that her age was catching up to her. By 44 AC, she was 73 years of age, and had grown thin and haggard, the flesh melting from her bones. Queen Alyssa, the wife of the late King Aenys, remained on the island as well, with her youngest son Jaehaerys and youngest daughter Alysanne, prisoners in all but name, given the freedom of the castle, but always with a guard present and a watchful eye from Visenya. Some rumours say Visenya even spent time with the young Jaehaerys and Alysanne, telling them tales of the conquest and their late grandfather and grandmother. If this were the case, no historical record exists that attests to it. Prince Viserys, the eldest surviving son of Aenys and Alyssa, was summoned to court by Maegor. Like his elder brother, he was a promising lad of 15 years. Beloved by the commons, Viserys was made the king's squire, but always with a Kingsguard knight for a shadow, to keep him well away from plots and treasons. He was Maegor's heir after all, but at the same time kept close, effectively as a hostage, should Alyssa or her kin attempt to rise against Maegor. For a brief while in 44 AC, it seemed as if the king might soon have that son he desired so desperately to carry on his legacy. Queen Alys Harroway, his second wife, announced she was with child, and the court rejoiced, with Maegor the most gleeful of them. The new Grand Maester, Desmond, confined Queen Alys to her bed as she grew great with child, as was the norm with highborn ladies. He also took direct charge of her care, assisted by 2 scepters and a midwife, and the Queen's 2 sisters, Jane and Hannah. Maegor insisted that his other wives served the pregnant queen as well, a decree that is rumoured to not have sat well with both Queen Cerys Hightower or Tyenna of Pentos. During her 3rd month of confinement to her bed, Alys began to bleed heavily from the womb and lost the child in quick succession. When King Maegor came to see the stillbirth, he was horrified to find the babe, the boy he had so desired, was more monster than child, with twisted limbs and a huge head and no eyes. "This cannot be my son," he roared in anguish. Then his grief turned to fury as he ordered the immediate execution of the midwives and scepters who he charged with the queen's care, and Grand Maester Desmond as well, sparing only Alys's sisters. It was said that Maegor was seated upon the Iron Throne with the head of the Grand Maester in his hands when Queen Tyenna came to tell him he had been deceived. The child was in fact not his seed. Seeing Queen Cerys Hightower return to court, older than her, and bitter, and childless, Alys Harroway had begun to fear that the same fate awaited her unless she gave the king a son. So she turned to her lord father, the Hand of the King. On the nights when the king was sharing a bed with Queen Cerys or Queen Tyenna, Lord Lucas Harroway sent men to his daughter's bed to get her with child. Maegor initially refused to believe this. He told Tyenna she was nothing more than a jealous witch and baron, throwing the Grand Maester's head at her. "Spiders do not lie," the mistress of whisperers replied curtly. She handed the king a list. Written on this list was the names of 20 alleged men who had given their seed to Queen Alys. Old men, young men, handsome men, homely men, knights and squires, lords and servants, even grooms and smiths and singers. The king's hand had cast a wide net indeed. The men had only one thing in common. All were men of proven virility, known to have fathered many healthy children. Under torture, all but 2 of the 20 confessed. One, a father of 12, still had the gold paid to him by Lord Harroway for his services. The questioning was carried out swiftly and secretly, so Lord Harroway and Queen Alys had no inkling of the king's suspicions, until one day the King's Guard burst in on them. Dragged from her bed, Queen Alys saw her sisters killed before her eyes as they tried to protect her. Her father, who was inspecting the Tower of the Hand, was flung from its roof to smash upon the stones below. Lord Harroway's sons, brothers, nephews were all taken as well, thrown onto the spikes that lined the dry moat of the rising Maegor's holdfast. Some took hours to die. The simple-minded fool Horace Harroway lingered for days. The 20 names on Queen Tyenna's list soon joined them, and then another dozen men, named by the first 20. The worst death was reserved for Queen Alys Harroway herself, who was given over to her fellow queen, Tyenna, for torment. We do not know what occurred in the dungeons of the Red Keep. Suffice to say it took her a long time to die, the better part of a fortnight, and that Maegor himself was present for it all, a witness to her agony. After her death, the queen's body was cut into 7 pieces and mounted upon spikes above the 7 gates of King's Landing, where they remained until they rotted away. King Maegor then departed the city himself, assembling a strong force of knights and men-at-arms, marching on Harrenhal, the seat of House Harroway, to complete the Harroway's destruction. The great castle on the God's Eye was lightly held, and its castellan, a nephew of Lord Lucas and a cousin of the late Queen, opened the gates of the king's approach. But surrender did not save him. Maegor put the entire garrison to the sword, along with every man and woman and child he found to have a drop of Harroway blood. He then marched to Lord Harroway's town on the Trident and did the same there. In the aftermath of the bloodletting, men began to say that Harrenhal was cursed, for every lordly house to hold it had come to a bad and bloody end. Nonetheless, many ambitious king's men coveted Black Harren's mighty seat, with its broad and fertile lands, so many that King Maegor grew weary of their games, and decreed that Harrenhal should go to the strongest of them. Thus did 23 knights of the king's household fight with sword and mace and lance amidst the blood-soaked streets of Lord Harroway's town. Sir Walton Towers emerged victorious, and Maegor named him the new Lord of Harrenhal. But the melee had been a savage affair, and Sir Walton did not live long enough to enjoy his lordship, dying of his wounds within 2 weeks. Harrenhal then passed to his eldest son, though its dominions were left much diminished. as the king granted Lord Harroway's town to Lord Alton Butterwell and the rest of Harroway's holdings to Lord Darnell Darry. Late in the year 44 AC, after King Maegor had spent weeks in the Riverlands, destroying House Harroway, root and stem, for their role in the apparent infidelity of the late Queen Alys Harroway, he had finally returned to King's Landing to seat himself upon the Iron Throne as the Red Keep continued to grow around him. But all that awaited Maegor was yet more tragedy. He was greeted with the news that his mother, the Dowager Queen Visenya, the sister and wife of Aegon the Conqueror, had died a natural death of old age on Dragonstone. But the situation was far worse than the death of such a powerful figure in Maegor's life. In the confusion that followed the sudden death of the Dowager Queen, Queen Alyssa Velaryon, the widow of the late King Aenys, and her youngest children, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, had made their escape from Dragonstone. Not only that, but they took the children's dragons, Vermithor and Silverwing, with them. To where they ran, no man could say. To add salt to this festering wound, the Queen had the audacity to steal Darksister, the famed Valyrian steel sword once belonging to the late Visenya. The king commanded his mother's body be burned as is tradition with House Targaryen, and her bones and ashes interned beside that of the Conqueror and her sister Rhaenys. Then he sent his Kingsguard to seize his squire, Prince Viserys, the eldest surviving son of his brother King Aenys and Maegor's technical heir. Chain him in the black cells and question him sharply, Maegor commanded. Ask him where his mother has gone. He may not know, protested Sir Owen Bush, a knight of Maegor's Kingsguard. Then let him die, the king answered furiously. Perhaps she will turn up for his funeral. The truth is, Prince Viserys did not know where his mother had gone. How could he have ever known? Visenya's death was as unexpected to all those on Dragonstone as it was at court. The truth was there was no grand scheme, just a spur-of-the-moment choice made by Queen Alyssa. A sudden opportunity arose, and she grasped it without thinking. Despite this fact, Tyenna of Pentos piled the prince with dark arts. After 9 brutal days of questioning, he died. His body was left out in the ward of the Red Keep for 2 weeks, at the king's command. Let his mother come and get him, he said. But when Queen Alyssa never appeared, at last Maegor consigned his nephew to the flames. The prince was only 15 years old when he was killed, and had reportedly been much loved by the small folk and lords. The realm wept for him, and many began to openly curse Maegor in the streets of the city below the rising Red Keep. Aegon the Conqueror had commanded it built. His son Maegor the Cruel had seen it completed. Afterward, he had taken the heads of every stonemason, woodworker, and builder who had laboured on it. Only the blood of the dragon would ever know the secrets of the fortress the Dragon Lords had built, he vowed. The Thoughts of Catelyn Stark, A Game of Thrones Chapter 18, Catelyn 4. In 45 AC, the construction on the Red Keep finally came to an end. The dream of Aegon the Conqueror at last completed after many long years. King Maegor celebrated its completion by feasting the builders and workmen who had laboured tirelessly on the castle, sending them wagon loads of strong wine and sweetmeats, and whores from the city's finest brothels. The revels lasted 3 days. Afterward, the king's knights moved in and put all the workmen to the sword, to prevent them from ever revealing the Red Keep's secrets. Their bones were interned beneath the castle that they had built. Again, this act of brutality by Maegor lost him considerable favour and damaged his reputation with the small folk irreparably, especially with the families of the dead workmen. All this would in turn come back to cause problems for Maegor. Hardly had the last stone been set on the Red Keep when Maegor commanded the ruins of the Sept of Remembrance be cleared from atop the hill of Rhaenys, and with them the bones and ashes of the warriors' sons who had perished there. In their place, he decreed a great stone stable for dragons would be erected, a lair worthy of Balerion, Vhagar, and their like. Thus commenced the building of the Dragon Pit, maybe the pinnacle of Targaryen construction and engineering in its sheer vision and scale. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it proved difficult to find builders, stonemasons, and labourers to work on the project. Many of the best workers had just been killed by Maegor, and so many of the workmen who did not work on the Red Keep had fled the city on news of the project that the king was forced to use prisoners from the city's dungeons as his workforce, under the supervision of master builders from Myr and Volantis. This less skilled and less willing workforce made progress on the Dragon Pit very slow in its initial stages. Later in that year, 45 AC, King Maegor took to the field once again to continue his war against the outlawed remnants of the Faith Militant, who had been plaguing the roads up and down the realm. He left Queen Tyenna to rule King's Landing, together with his new hand, Lord Edwell Celtgar. In the great woods south of the Blackwater, known as the Kingswood, Maegor's forces hunted down a score of poor fellows who had taken refuge there, sending many to the wall and hanging those who refused to take the Black. Their leader, the woman known as Poxy Jane Poor, continued to elude the king until at last she was betrayed by 3 of her own followers, who had received pardons and knighthoods as their reward. 3 septons, travelling with King Maegor, declared Poxy Jane a witch, and Maegor ordered her to be burned alive in a field beside the Wentwater River. When the day appointed for her execution came, 300 of her followers, poor fellows and peasants alike, burst from the woods to rescue her. The king had anticipated this, however, and his men were ready for the attack. The rescuers were surrounded and slaughtered. Amongst the last to die was their leader, who proved to be Sir Horace Hill, the bastard hedge knight who had escaped the carnage at the Great Fork 3 years earlier. This time, he proved less fortunate. Elsewhere in the realm, the tide of the times had begun to turn against the king. Small folk and lords alike had come to despise him for his many publicly known cruelties, and many had begun to give help and comfort to his enemies. This Septon Moon, this so-called High Septon, raised up by the poor fellows against the High Septon in Old Town, who they called the High Lickspittle, roamed the riverlands and reached at will, drawing huge crowds whenever he emerged from the woods to preach against Maegor. The hill country north of the Golden Tooth was ruled in all but name by the Red Dog, Sir Joffrey Doggett, the self-proclaimed Grand Captain of the Warriors' Sons. Neither Casterly Rock or Riverrun seemed inclined in any way to move against him. Dennis the Lame and Ragged Salis remained at large, and wherever they roamed, small folk helped keep them safe. Knights and men-at-arms sent out to bring them to justice often vanished. In 46 AC, King Maegor returned to the Red Keep with 2,000 skulls, the fruits of a year of campaigning. They were the heads of poor fellows and warriors' sons, he announced, as he dumped them beneath the Iron Throne. But it was widely believed that many of these grisly trophies belonged to simple crofters, field hands, and swineherds guilty of no crime but faith. The coming of the new year, 47 AC, found King Maegor Targaryen still without an heir, not even a bastard who he might legitimize, which was extremely unusual and set many to whispering. Nor did it seem like Queen Tyenna of Pentos would give him the heir he desired, despite much effort on the king's part to make it happen. After each moon turned, the king's interest in his wife began to lessen, and while she still continued to serve Maegor as a mistress of whispers, eventually the king would no longer share her bed. He decided it was past time for him to take a new wife, one that would give him the heir he so desperately wanted. Legally speaking, without a child of his own, his current heir was his elder brother's youngest and last surviving son, Prince Jaehaerys. The risk was, all the time Jaehaerys was his heir, and beyond Maegor's direct control, he could become a banner for his many enemies to rally to. Thus, Maegor's counsellors all agreed that he needed a new wife, but parted ways on who that woman should be. Grand Maester Benefer suggests a match with the proud and beautiful Lady Astafel Clarissa Dane, in the hopes of detaching her lands and house from Dawn. Lord Ultram Butterwell, Master of Coin, offered his own widowed sister, a stout woman, but with 7 healthy and strong children. Though admittedly no beauty, he argued her fertility had been proven beyond a doubt. The king's hand, Lord Edwell Celtgar, had 2 young maiden daughters, 13 and 12 years of age respectively. House Celtgar were also descended from old Valyria, like House Velaryon and House Targaryen, so in Celtgar's view, the match made sense. He urged the king to take his pick of them, or marry both if he preferred. Lord Velaryon of Driftmark advised Maegor to send for his niece, Rhaena, the widow of Aegon The Uncrowned. By taking her to wife, Maegor could unite their claims, preventing any fresh rebellion from gathering around her, and acquire hostages against plots her mother, Queen Alyssa Velaryon, might foment, using her own son Jaehaerys. Maegor was known to be a difficult man to advise, more so after the loss of his mother, Dowager Queen Visenya, who seemed to be the only person the king truly listened to. But on this occasion, King Maegor listened to each man in turn, though in the end he scorned most of the women they put forward. But some of the reasons and arguments his advisors put forward took root in him, and he formed an ambitious plan. He would have a woman of proven fertility, he decided, but not Butterwell's fat and homely sister. He would take more than one wife, as Lord Calthgar had urged. 2 wives would double his chances of getting a son. 3 wives would triple it, he reasoned, and one of those wives should surely be his niece. There was wisdom in Lord Valarian's counsel. Queen Alyssa and her 2 younger children remained in hiding. At the time, they had believed they had crossed the narrow sea to Tyrosh or perhaps Volantis or one of the 3 cities, but they still represented a threat to Maegor's crown and any son he might father. Taking Aenys' daughter to wife would weaken any claims put forward by her younger siblings, in some regard at least. After the death of Aegon the Uncrowned and her flight to Fair Isle, Rhaena Targaryen had acted quickly to protect her young twin daughters, Arya and Rhaella. If Prince Aegon had truly been the king, his eldest daughter, Arya, stood to be his heir, and might therefore claim to be the rightful queen of the 7 kingdoms. But there was 2 issues at play here. It is highly debated, even by allies of Rhaena, whether Aegon the Uncrowned was truly a king, given he only claimed the crown. He never had a coronation or sat the Iron Throne. He was never recognised uncontested as king. Plus, Arya and her sister Rhaella were barely 1 year old, and many would hold their gender against them when it came to any claim to the throne. Rhaena knew all of this, and to make such claims would be tantamount to condemning them to death. Instead, she dyed their hair, changed their names, and sent them away from her, entrusting them to certain powerful allies who would see them fostered in good homes by worthy men who would have no inkling of their true identities. Even their mother must not know where the girls were going, the princess insisted. What she did not know, she could not reveal, even under torture. The sad truth of the matter was no such escape was possible for Rhaena Targaryen herself, and fate was looming. It was only a matter of time. Though she could change her name, dye her hair, and garb herself in a tavern wench's rough spun or robes of a sceptre, there was no disguising her dragon, Dreamfire. Dreamfire was a slender, pale blue she-dragon with silvery markings who had already produced 2 clutches of dragon eggs, and Rhaena had been riding her since the age of 12. Dragons are not easily hidden. Instead, the princess took them both as far from Maegor as she possibly could, to Fair Isle in the Sunset Sea, where Mark Farman granted her the hospitality of Fair Castle, with its tall white towers rising high above the Sunset Sea. And there she rested, reading, praying, wondering how long she would be given before her uncle sent for her. Rhaena never doubted that he would, she said afterwards. It was a question of when, not if. She was too much of a powerful political tool. The summons came sooner than she would have liked it to, though not as soon as she feared it could have been. There was no question of defying him. That would only bring down the king's wrath on Fair Isle with Balerion. Rhaena had grown fond of Lord Farman, and supposedly more than fond of his second son, Andro. She would not repay their kindness with fire and blood. She mounted Dreamfire and flew to the Red Keep, where she learned that she must marry her uncle, her husband's killer, and there as well, Rhaena met her fellow brides, for this was to be a triple wedding. The 3 women Maegor the Cruel married would become known collectively as the Black Brides. Lady Jane of House Westerling had been married to Lord Alyn Tarback, who died with Prince Aegon in the battle beneath the God's Eye. A few months later, she had given her late husband a posthumous son. She was tall and slender, with long brown hair. Lady Jane was being courted by a younger son of the Lord of Casterly Rock when Maegor sent for her, but this meant very little unless to the king. More troubling was the case of Lady Eleanor of House Costain, the wife of Sir Theo Bolling, a landed knight who had fought for the king in his last campaign against the Poor Fellows. Though only 19, Lady Eleanor had already given Bolling 3 sons, when the king's eye fell upon her. The youngest boy was still at her breast when Sir Theo was arrested by the King's Guard and charged with conspiring with Queen Alyssa to murder the king and place the boy Jaehaerys on the Iron Throne. Though Bolling protested his innocence, he was found guilty and beheaded the same day. King Maegor gave his widow 7 days to mourn in honour of the gods, then summoned her to tell her they would marry. At the town of Stony Sept, in the Riverlands, Septon Moon, the Septon of the True Faithful, denounced King Maegor's wedding plans, and hundreds of small folk cheered rabidly, but few others dared to raise their voices against the king. The true High Septon, in Old Town, took ship, sailing to King's Landing to perform the marriage rites, while many condemned him for doing so. On a warm spring day, Maegor Targaryen took 3 wives in the wards of the Red Keep, that each of his new queens was garbed and cloaked in the colours of their father's house. The people of King's Landing called them the Black Brides, for all 3 were widows and had an air of sadness around them. The presence of Lady Jane's sons and Lady Eleanor's 3 boys at the wedding ensured that they would play their parts in the ceremony. There were many who expected a show of defiance from Princess Rhaena. Such hopes were quelled when Queen Tyenna appeared, escorting 2 young girls with silver hair and purple eyes, clad in the red and black of House Targaryen. "You were foolish to think you could hide them from me," Tyenna told the princess. Rhaena bowed her head and spoke her vows in a voice as cold as ice. Many queer and contradictory stories are told of the night that followed, and with the passage of so many years, it's become difficult to separate truth from the legend. Did the 3 black brides share a single bed, as some claim? This seems unlikely. Did Maegor visit all 3 women during the night and consummate all 3 unions? Perhaps he did. Did Princess Rhaena attempt to kill the king with a dagger concealed beneath her pillow, as she later claimed? Did Eleanor Costaigne scratch the king's back to bloody ribbons as they coupled? Did Jane Westerling drink the fertility potion that Queen Tyenna supposedly had brought her, or throw it in the older woman's face? Was such a potion ever mixed or offered? The first account of it does not appear until well into the reign of King Jaehaerys, 20 years after both women were dead. This we know. In the aftermath of the wedding, Maegor declared Rhaena's daughter Arya his lawful heir until such a time as the gods granted him a son, while sending her twin sister Rhaella to Old Town to be raised as a scepter. His nephew Jaehaerys, the rightful heir by all laws of the 7 kingdoms, was expressly disinherited in the same decree. Queen Jane's son was confirmed as Lord of Tarbeck Hall and sent to Casterly Rock to be raised as a ward of Lord Lyman Lannister. Queen Eleanor's eldest boys were similarly disposed of, one to the Eyrie and one to Highgarden. The Queen's youngest babe was turned over to a wet nurse, as the King found the Queen's nursing irksome. Half a year later, Edwell Celtigar, the Hand of the King, announced that Jane was with child. Hardly had her belly begun to swell when the King himself revealed that Queen Eleanor was also pregnant. Maegor showered both women with gifts and honours, and granted new lands and offices to their fathers, brothers and uncles, but his joys proved to be short-lived. 3 months before she was due, Queen Jane brought to bed by a sudden onset of labour pains, and was delivered a stillborn child as monstrous as the one Alys Harroway had once birthed, a legless and armless creature possessed of both male and female genitalia. Nor did the mother long survive the child. Maegor was a cursed man, men said. He had slain his nephew, made war against the faith and the High Septon, defied the gods, committed murder and incest, adultery and rape. His privy parts were poisoned, his seed full of worms. The gods would never grant him a living son, or so the whispers ran. Maegor himself settled on a different explanation, and Sir Owen Bush and Sir Melodon Moore seized Queen Tyenna and delivered her to the dungeons. There, the Pentoshi Queen made a full confession, even as the king's torturers readied their implements. She had poisoned Jane Westerling's child in the womb, just as she had Alys Harroway's. It would be the same with Eleanor Costaigne's whelp, she promised. It is said that the king slew her himself, cutting out her heart with black fire and feeding it to his dogs. But even in death, Tyenna at the tower had her revenge, for it came to pass just as she had promised. The moon turned and turned again, and in the black of night Queen Eleanor too was delivered a malformed and stillborn child, an eyeless boy born with rudimentary wings. We can never truly know if Queen Tyenna was to blame for the woes of Maegor. Some argued that she was responsible for the stillbirth out of jealousy, others that she knew regardless of her defense, or the truth, Maegor would have her tortured and her death long and suffering regardless, that she falsely confessed to save her own torment. We can never know the truth for certain. 48 AC was the 6th year of King Maegor Targaryen's reign, and the last year of his life. No man in the Seven Kingdoms could doubt the king was now accursed after his third stillborn child with a third woman. What slowly dwindling followers still remained to him began to melt away faster and faster. Word reached King's Landing that Sir Joffrey Doggett and his warriors' sons had been seen entering Riverrun, not as captives but as guests of Lord Tully. The people's High Septon, Septon Moon, appeared once more, leading thousands of the faithful on a march across the Reach to Old Town, where they announced their intent of removing the Lickspittle High Septon in the Starry Sept. In demand, he denounced the abomination on the Iron Throne and lifted the ban on the military orders of the faith. When Lord Oakheart and Lord Rowan appeared before him with their levies, they came not to attack Septon Moon, but to instead join him. Lord Edwell Celtigar resigned as hand of the king and returned to his seat on Claw Isle. Reports from the Dornish marches suggest that Dornishmen were gathering in the passes, preparing to invade. While Maegor had ruled with an iron fist, it was clear that same fist had begun to rust and corrode. He ruled with fear, and people, lords and small folk alike, were starting to no longer fear his wrath. The worst blow of all came from Storm's End, the seat of House Baratheon, the once firm allies of House Targaryen, who were once again about to enter the political fray. There, on the shores of Shipbreaker Bay, Lord Rhaegar Baratheon proclaimed the young Prince Jaehaerys, the last living son of King Aenys, to be the true and lawful king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, and in turn Prince Jaehaerys named Lord Rhaegar protector of the realm and his hand as the king. The prince's mother, Queen Alyssa Velaryon, and his sister, Princess Alysanne, stood beside him as Jaehaerys unsheathed the stolen Valyrian steel blade, Dark Sister, and vowed to end the reign of his brutal, usurping uncle. Hundreds of lords and Stormland knights cheered the proclamation. This came as a huge shock to Maegor. After Alyssa and her children had fled Dragonstone in the wake of the Dowager Queen Visenya's death, many assumed she would return to her family seat on Driftmark. When she did not, many then believed she had fled Westeros altogether, given the children's dragons had not been spotted at all across the realm, perhaps to Lys, Tyrosh, Pentos or Volantis. Few expected Alyssa to emerge in the Stormlands, with the support of Rhaegar Baratheon and an army of Stormlanders ready to march to war. Prince Jaehaerys himself was just a boy of 14 years when he claimed the throne, said to be a handsome youth, skilled with a lance and a longbow, and a gifted rider. More, he rode a great bronze and tan beast called Vermithor, and his sister, Alysanne, a young maid of 12, commanded her own dragon, Silverwing. Maegor has only one dragon, Lord Rhaegar told the Stormlords. Our prince has two. But we must recall Balerion would still be a threat given his age and size and sheer ferocity. Aegon The Uncrowned had paid with his life for underestimating the Black Dread. The very fact that Lord Rhaegar Baratheon felt confident enough to now make a stand and not fear the flames of Balerion speaks volumes to how Maegor's reputation had fallen. The situation only worsened for Maegor when news of the emergence of Jaehaerys reached the Red Keep and that Rhaegar Baratheon was gathering his forces at Storm's End. Queen Rhaena Targaryen, the prince's elder sister, mounted her own dragon Dreamfire and flew to join him, abandoning the uncle she had been forced to marry. She took her daughter Arya and Blackfire, the sword of kings, with her, stolen from the king's own scabbard as he slept. Jaehaerys and Rhaegar now had 3 dragons, maybe a match for Balerion, but worst of all for Maegor was the loss of Blackfire, the sword of kings, the sword of his father Aegon the Conqueror, which many saw as a symbol of the legitimacy of the king. Maegor's response was slow and confused. With the loss of the network of informants controlled by the late Queen Tyenna, he was effectively blind to much of the growing threat to his reign. He commanded the Grand Maester to send forth his ravens, summoning all his loyal bannermen and to gather at King's Landing, only to find that Bennifer had taken ship for Pentos. Finding Princess Arya gone, he sent a rider to Old Town to demand the head of her twin sister Rhaella to punish their mother for her betrayal. But Lord Hightower imprisoned the messenger instead. 2 of Maegor's own Kingsguard vanished one night and went over to Jaehaerys, and Sir Owen Bush, another knight of the Kingsguard, found dead outside a brothel, his member stuffed into his mouth. Lord Velaryon of Driftmark was amongst the first major lords to declare for Jaehaerys, which makes sense given they were kin to Jaehaerys' mother, Queen Alyssa. As the Velaryons were the realm's traditional admirals, Maegor had woken up that morning to find he had lost the entire royal fleet to Jaehaerys and Rhaegar. This was quickly followed by the Tyrells of Highgarden, with all the power at their reach. The Hightowers of Oldtown, the Redwynes of the Arbor, the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, the Arryns of the Eyrie, the Royces of Runestone, one by one, all the great lords and major houses came out against Maegor. In King's Landing, a score of lesser lords did gather at Maegor's command. Perhaps the most powerful among them, Lord Darkland of Duskendale, who was joined by Lord Massey of Stonedance, the new Lord Towers of Harrenhal, Lord Staunton of Rook's Rest, and Lord Bar Emmon of Sharp Point, Lord Buckwell of Antlers, Lord Rosby of Stokeworth, Hayford, Hart, Birch, Rollingford, Bywater, and Mallory. Yet, they commanded less than 4,000 men amongst them, and only 1 in 10 of them were true knights, with most of the great lords and powerful houses declaring for Jaehaerys. It's a surprise that many of these minor lords were even brave enough to side with Maegor. Perhaps the rewards on offer, should they prevail, however unlikely it was enough to entice these minor lords. Maegor brought them together in the Red Keep one night to discuss his plan of battle, how he would crush his young nephew, just as he had done Aegon the Uncrowned. When they saw how few they truly were, and realised not a single great lord was coming to join them, many lost heart. Lord Hayford was bold enough and went as far enough to urge Maegor to abdicate the throne and take the Black. Hayford was beheaded on the spot and continued his war council as if nothing had happened, with Hayford's head mounted on a lance behind the Iron Throne. All day the lords made their plans, and late into the night. It was the hour of the wolf when at last Maegor allowed them to take their leave. The king remained behind, brooding on the Iron Throne as they departed. Lord Towers and Lord Rosby were the last to see Maegor. Hours later, as dawn was breaking, the last of Maegor's queens came seeking after him. Queen Eleanor found him still upon the Iron Throne, pale and dead, his robes soaked through with blood. His arms had been slashed open to the bone, from wrist to elbow, on the jagged barbs of the throne, and another blade had gone through his neck to emerge beneath his chin. Many to this day believe it was the Iron Throne itself that killed Maegor. Maegor was alive and well when Rosby and Towers left the throne room, they argue, and the guards at the door swore no one entered afterwards, until Queen Eleanor made her discovery. Some say it was in fact the Queen herself who forced him down onto those barbs to avenge the murder of her first husband. The King's Guard might have done the deed, but that would have required them to have acted in concert, as there was 2 knights posted at each door. It might also have been a person or unknown persons entering and leaving the throne room through some hidden passage. The Red Keep has its secrets known only to the dead. Perhaps a family member, or even a lucky survivor of Maegor's purge of the builders of the Red Keep, somehow lived and came to take their revenge. It might also be that the king tasted despair in the dark watches of night and took his own life, twisting the blades as needed and opening his veins to spare himself the defeat and disgrace that surely awaited him. The reign of King Maegor Targaryen, known to the history and legends as Maegor the Cruel, lasted only 6 years and 6 days. Upon his death, his corpse was burned in the yard of the Red Keep, his ashes interned afterward on Dragonstone, beside those of his mother, Dowager Queen Visenya. He died childless and left no heir.